Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, boys and girls. How are y'all doing today? Yes. Well, I tried to not make it, or I tried to not make it on time, but oops, ignore that. Ignore that. It's all good. I tried to not be on time, but it turns out that I'm just on time after all. So what can I do? I shouldn't have displayed my iPad's menu bar either, but that's okay. It's all good. Yes, well, such is the nature of life, and it's all good. I made it, or I did it in such a way that even if I made a mistake like that, it would have been fine. It's just me calling myself in a different account, so it's all good. So, what are we on today? Well, today we are talking about the origins of the modern banking system. Right, I know a bunch of our bankers, like, obviously know all of, well, they know how it works. I'm not sure if they know the history behind it, but obviously the way that the banking system works today is a little bit different from the reading that we did yesterday. But at its fundamental level, everything that Walter really Bagehot really spoke of in Lombard Street still applies today. I am using the wrong background. Give me 1 second. 1 second. No, I'll use the gray one. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. So, what can you see? You can see nothing. Yeah, that's just a Discord call. Well, okay. So before we get into it, I guess I'll explain. So essentially, how I get my iPad onto my laptop for me then to stream with, I use Discord to call myself on a separate account on a secondary account that is linked only to my whose only friend is myself, right? Because obviously I'm because I have no friends, obviously. and so what that means is that I can then share the screen with on an iPad with Discord, and that's how we get Walter Bagehot. Actually, let me just do one quick thing. Let me just move this over here, since we don't need the frame anyway. And I'll move this over here, and we'll just move this up a tiny bit. Just bear with me. This way I don't have to do it again in the future. Yeah, that looks about right. Excellent. Okay, so what were we doing today? Well, the sponsor for today was actually to essentially go over what the first chapter of what we read yesterday, the broad theories, and essentially explain that to our non-banking, world owning, I suppose, members. And also, actually, apparently some of our friends in Asia want to learn the proper English terms, even though they work in Hong Kong and work for multinationals, which is, it's fine. Why is it flashing? It's flashing because my connection is terrible. But no, no, it's not flashing because my connection is terrible. It's flashing because, I suppose, like, when you stream something like this, right, in real time, what Discord is trying to do, you will occasionally drop frames. And so when you drop frames, that's, I mean, what else is going to happen, right? And interestingly enough, we are also going to be talking about this. Oh, I thought I could write with my pencil. Am I not? Oh no, I can. It's over here. We're going to be talking about that. Oh. Though that is looking very... The pencil mark, look, the pencil mark is so thin. Ah, that's okay. highlighter? There we go. Highlighter. Can I just... yes, I can. Sorry, yes, I am getting distracted. Okay, so let's talk about, like, let's start at the very beginning, right? So I have started two little topics. One is Lombard Street. Oops. One is Lombard Street, and one is the GE stuff. But we'll talk about the GE stuff in the future. Like, probably sometime later today, really. What is this software? This software is called Margin Notes. This is actually how I did most of my university courses. Essentially, what the software allows me to do is it allows me to, as you can see, I can highlight these things, and then it'll give me a little, I can build what amount to be mind maps here, right? So, for example, if I wanted to say a highlight of the Appeals Act, we do want to talk about the Appeals Act, if only for its annoyingness in the grand scheme of things. Oops, that's not it. But yes, you saw that in action. Essentially, when I highlight something, it just becomes an item in here, and whenever I click on each of these items, it takes me to where it is in the text that this item comes from. So, oops. I can do that as well, anyway, okay. So let's talk about the reading. Where did I get the? You mean the text? Well, Project Gutenberg is it's a project to essentially digitize all of our history, all of our written history in the public domain, right? So things that are in the public domain get digitized, and Project Gutenberg tries to essentially keep an archive of it. Well, I mean, I try to keep the German pronunciation, but it doesn't always necessarily work. As for questions, yes, please do tell me if you guys have questions, and we can talk about them. I know we haven't started yet, really. We'll get there, right? So, what was the first question we had yesterday? I can't quite remember. We don't want to talk about the Appeal Act. Appeal Act is not important. Is to say that it's the greatest combination of economical power and delicacy. Yes, we can talk about this. Lombard Street. Let's first talk about what Lombard Street is. Well, it is powerful like that, right? So let's see, Lombard Street. Let me turn this into let me turn this into a set of banks in London. Can you see that? You can see the keyboard. Oh, that's probably not a good idea. Give me 1 second. Let me. Well, it will try to auto suggest things, and we don't want it to do that. I thought I had a Bluetooth keyboard. Hold on. Is this connected to the iPad? Why are none of you connected to the iPad? No? Okay. What number 2 are you connected to? No? 3? No? I thought I did preparations for today. It turns out I didn't. Okay. Well, so then in that case, we're just not going to use these for now. We're going to talk about it in some other future time. And especially because I can't switch out, because then you'll see all of my applications and all of my chat history, and that would just be terrible, right, at this point. If that what it will suggest, you know what it might suggest. So well, half of it will be a private conversation, and the other half will be full of me telling you guys to shut up, right? Like that's essentially what that's essentially like half of my full-time job now. And anyway, okay. Let's just write it out. We'll write it out. So Lombard Street is in. Oops, that doesn't work. Is in London, comma, England. Circa, how much are we saying? 18. This book was written what, 1873 about? 1870, let's say 1874, and it essentially had the most powerful banks in the world. And they were all on that street, and the Bank of England was on that street, and so therefore it was the greatest concentration essentially of money that the world had ever seen up until then, right? And part of the reason for that is do I have to write? Oops, no, that's not what I wanted. What happened to all my tools? Excuse me? Oh, I don't want to annotate, I want to excerpt. There we go. And so what I want to excerpt is this. Right? We talked about it on the when I read this yesterday. But essentially that this is powerful, right? Like London had essentially 10 times the amount of money in London than there existed in Paris. And what is that? That's like almost 5 times, not 5 times, 10 times. Yeah, exactly. Like it was the greatest concentration of money from such a small geography. And the reason why London was able to have all of that money, we will talk about. Oops, not like that. Cool. So we talked about that. Floating loan fund. That's important, right? How much greater the ready balance? The floating loan fund. And what is this, right? The floating loan fund is essentially it's an amount that is readily able to be loaned out at a moment's notice, and that's very powerful, right? Because money is only useful if you can use it. I know that sounds quite technical, so why am I on a dragging rectangle? There we go. Let's move that down. So money is only of use if you can use it. If money is locked into an estate in the form of the price of the house, in the form of the price of the land, then it's not really usable, right? Like it's simply not something that can be readily put to work. And so what Lombard Street, what those banks originally did, and we are used to it today because of Lombard Street, of everyone who worked there. And that's the whole point of this book, is to, well, the whole point of this book is to explain Lombard Street to the people that as they existed in 1870s. But to us, it's a great reflection of what makes the modern banking system work, and why money is so much more important than a barter economy, right? And we'll get to that. How long has it been? It's been 15 minutes and I haven't started. Excellent. And so what a loan fund is, you can think of it as just the amount of money that is available to make loans, right? And say you keep associate it and put it here. And let's say, I mean, yeah, I very much enjoy this application. It works really well for me, but it won't work well for everyone else. Right? It won't work for everyone. Right? Loan fund. A pot of money to lend to other people. Right, so i.e. we can see that there is in the public banks, right? And you think this is interesting. Wonderful, thank you for thinking that it's interesting. In the public banks, remember we talked about this, right? Oh, I don't think I actually put it, which publish their accounts. Yes, we should do that first. The deposits of banks which publish their accounts. Right, so essentially these are the public companies that have that tell us how much money they have in their banks. This is how much money they have, and he goes on to state that those who don't publish their accounts, so private banks, tend to have a lot more money everywhere else, but dramatically more in London. And there are reasons why we know that that is true, and those reasons are really obscure and come down to essentially just like, you know people because you work there and you go out and have drinks together, right? I.e., what am I saying? Money collected from depositors to fund other people's ventures. And you might ask, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to do this? Well, because if you have the money and it's just sitting on the countertop, it's not making any money. But if you have more money than you know what to do with, you should put it to work somehow. And this is one way of putting money to work. Putting savings to work. And out of this arose a whole bunch of stuff, like deposit insurance, etc. But we will talk about that afterwards, right? So essentially what this is saying is we have a whole bunch of money and it's sitting around doing nothing, and the English have, or the British have, encouraged that money to be put in banks, and for banks in London, specifically on Lombard Street near the Bank of England, to collect all of that money in one place. And that is really powerful, and we'll get to why that is, right? Oh yes, you can also see unknown deposits, actually this deposits in banks which do not publish their accounts, blah blah blah, all that good stuff. Are in London much greater than those many other of these cities, blah blah. How much cash exists, right? So then he goes on to talk about what the money market is, and obviously the money market doesn't just talk about money that exists in banks and can be loaned out, but money that exists in the entire economy, right? And this is a big timer, that's fine. But this is the important part. Exists much more cash exists out of. We're good? I just saw my screen flash out. Right? So this cash, strictly speaking, is also part of the money market, but this cash does not do any work because you can't access it. Remember we talked about it before, right? It is not attainable. Right? And so the problem is there is no link. Oops. There is no link between these two. Annotate from top to bottom. Nothing. Don't worry about it. It's not important. Annotate from nothing. Right? And that's all that means. It's that this money that's sitting in well, doesn't matter. These two are one family anyway, so we'll just put that up there. Money that exists on the countertop, money that exists behind the sofa, money that exists in simply in people's pockets, can't be used if someone wants to start a company, right? Like, say if I want to now go out, or let's say I'm on Lombard Street and I want to go, or I'm in England in at the height of the Industrial Revolution, and I have this brilliant idea for new machinery that would completely upend the world. Actually, let's not even say that I'm in England. Let's say that I'm in France, and I have this brilliant idea. And it's just impossible to find that money in France, because the people who do want to make loans to you, they are afraid of losing their money, and there's not even that much money to begin with, right? And so because there's not that much money to begin with, people who do make the loans, they have to be very, very careful about the money that they want to loan out. But in England, it's different because there's such a huge pool of money. If you're willing to pay the price for that money, in essentially in terms of interest rates, in terms of collateral, then you are able to find that money that you can then use to put to work, to put your invention to good use, right? To use that money to fund your invention so that you can make more money. And that's like part of the reason why the Industrial Revolution, actually I would say almost 95% of the reason why the Industrial Revolution took off in England as opposed to anywhere else is because of the money market. Absolutely 100%. I will fight everyone to the death on this. It's because money is, it's not perfect, but it's perfect enough to transfer labor and ideas in such a way that we can expand and we can grow. And there's no, you can't pay people in ox. You can't pay people in pork chops. That's just unreasonable, right? Like, you would have to negotiate with every shareholder about how many pork chops they would want, and then they would have to then go down the line and negotiate how they can turn those pork chops into other things that they might need. And so a barter economy is simply impossible to use to maintain a very large and very large supply chain, right? Like, it works on a small village, absolutely, but it simply cannot work when you go into the Industrial Revolution. And that's exactly why money is so important, and that's exactly why London was the greatest city of its time in the Victorian era. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. Other cities might be bigger, other cities might have more people, might have more absolute store money, right? For example, if you think about Beijing at the height of the, let's say just 50 years before this, let's say in the 1800s, absolutely I would consider that one of the richest cities in the world, but the money does not flow to people who need it from people who have it, right? Because the people who have it simply hoard it, and that's human nature. That's what we do. We hoard money. It's just it's even better if you can hoard the money and let someone else use that money and pay you to use that money. And that's what the banking system is all about. Right? So that's exactly what Bagehot says here. English money is borrowable, right? So let's add this to here and this to here, right? Because English money is borrowable, actually we can leave this up here. That means that money is able to be put to work. Our people are bolder in dealing with money than any other continental. I mean, you get into a bit of racism, but that's fine. And here is the crux, right? And here's the crux of the entire thing. a million in the hands of a single banker is a powerful thing. A million spread out over a million people is no use at all. And that's just absolutely true, right? That's what these floating loan funds are. That's what the money market is that you're able to ignore that. Is that you're able to pay to use money. And that sounds slightly counterintuitive until you realize what that means, right? It means if you have a really good idea that can make you a lot of money and you just need some money to start up, then you can promise someone else, you can promise a banker that has money that they're not using, that essentially you can say, I have this great idea. I will borrow £10,000 from you, and every year I will return 5%. I will pay you an interest of 5%, right? So every year on that $10,000, the banker who has access, who holds onto that $10,000, gets free $500 for no reason, except that money has gone somewhere else to be used. And we'll come to sort of the issues to the depositors with that in a bit. Yes, I mean, there's a reason why the CDIC, FDIC, Canada in the US, I forget what it's called in Britain. Anyway, the depositors insurance, there's a reason why that is now a thing in the Western world, and that's obviously because you don't want people who put their money into banks and then the bank goes out of business. You don't want those people to lose all of their money, and that is a thing that has happened, and that is a thing that happens when the banker lends that money to unprofitable ventures. And humans aren't perfect, and so that's part of the banking system. We'll come. The effect is seen constantly, blah blah, which hospital obtain. Any foreign country can borrow at a price. Some countries can borrow cheaper than others, if they pay enough for it. And that's kind of the idea, right? That's sort of a corollary to that, right? That if you're willing to pay to have money now, right, you're essentially trading your future cash flow for money now, and sometimes that is very important. Actually, in fact, I know of a few companies that have done this in recent times, right? Like one of the biggest ones that comes to mind is AMD, which makes processors, graphics cards, and all of that. For a while, they were doing terribly. They had no cash flow. So what they did was they actually sold their headquarters, the building of their headquarters, and leased it back. And essentially, nothing changes about where they are, what they do, anything. All they do is they gain a gigantic pool of money from having sold their building, and then they promise the people that they have sold their building to that they will pay them some amount every year. And this is important because this actually all arises out of our floating loan fund. Where's our floating? I don't need this. Out of our floating loan fund, right? Because sometimes there are now things. Let's put that in. I can't type it. Okay, I'll type it in the future. But hi McCann, how are you? Well, no, I can't have you see all of my secrets. That would just be weird, right? So no, we're going to type that in the future. Once I reconnect my keyboard, which for whatever reason is not connecting, I'll connect it back in. It's fine. So the floating loan fund, essentially. Sorry, McCann, I do not play those kinds of games, unfortunately. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, which is that the floating loan fund in our current world comes in many ways and shapes, right? One of the biggest are the retirement funds that exist in the world. So what was it? There was one from Canada that was known all over. Teachers pension fund. Yes. I think it's Ontario's, whatever, pension fund for Ontario teachers. for whatever reason, they've done really, really well lately, and they're actually one of the biggest. And you can see why pension funds want something like we talked about for AMD, right? We talked about the fact that they want that AMD wanted a big pot of cash up front to fund their growth, and pension funds are uniquely suited for recurring annuities, right? Because they need to have a stable income. They need to have a stable cash flow that comes in every year to pay for the pensions of teachers that retire. And so there's very good overlap there. Like somebody needs money now, and somebody needs a recurring number of money every year going forward. And so that's how AMD is able to essentially sell their headquarters, lease it back, and in exchange, of course, there is a time value of money. So AMD pays some. The end sum that AMD would pay for their headquarters is a little bit bigger than the money that they got, but they got a whole bunch of cash up front, and that means that they can use that cash to expand, and hopefully, they will grow at a rate that is higher than their interest rate, and therefore they will actually make money in the end, right? That is why if we have the ability to borrow, why it's kind of interesting to borrow, right? Yeah. And Badger does talk about it, but in sort of like a symbol. We talked about it yesterday. English banks are not themselves great lenders, but they are great lenders to those who lend. They advance on foreign stocks with a margin, blah blah. Nominal lender funds the rest, and that past works is achieved. So what is on a margin? We should talk about that real quick. Well, actually, we don't have to talk about margins today. We can talk about margins later. Just keep in mind that it's somewhere over there. Well, yeah, a margin just means that you're not doing all of the work. That you are adding some amount of the work, and you in the case of English banks, you're giving things legitimacy. You are also conferring some reputational legitimacy to things. Anyway, yes, exactly. And I mean, this was, even at the height of the Industrial Revolution, this was a time of great upheaval in the banking industry, right? Like before all of our regulatory frameworks were set, this was just completely how do you say it? You could say it was the Wild West. I guess people still sometimes talk about things as if they were the Wild West, and that's kind of the idea that we talked about depositors insurance certainly didn't exist in this case, at this time in 18. Let me write this down. Oh, London 1874. Yeah, and so what happens is when a bank goes bad, they make a bad loan that doesn't get repaid, and so they've lost all of their depositors' money. What happens? Well, the depositors, like the shareholders, essentially eat the costs, right? So you need to trust the person that you put the money into, and unfortunately, that is it's unfortunate, but a lot of fortunes were ruined, and I'm sure we've seen those. I've never read any of the books, but the historical fiction a lot of the time almost always talks about, some great capitalist who lost his money, or some great family that put their money in a bank, and then the bank fell, and therefore the family also fell along with it. That kind of stuff. Yeah. What was I? Oh yes. We talked about loss that any undertaking seen likely to pay and seen to be likely to pay can perish for want of money. Right? This is no longer the case, essentially, what this is saying. So because of this, that is no longer the case. Let's just cross that out really like that. Okay. A citizen of London in Queen Elizabeth's time could not have Elizabeth the First, by the way, not second, who's still alive. Well, I mean, okay, to be fair, the Duke of Edinburgh really did have a fairly long and interesting life. So can we really, like, I mean, he's resting. Let him rest, right? Taking the world as a whole, that in poor states there is no spare money for new and great undertakings, and in most rich states the money is too scattered. Yes. There we go. And so this is the state of the world as it is, still there, right? That kind of stuff. That kind of idea. Yeah. Are the most conspicuous of the power. They are not by any means the most remarkable. Carried upon borrowed capital, blah blah blah. 10%, blah. Okay. So, what happens when you can borrow money? Right, and this is sort of the key for this. It's this part. Blah 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 blah. We'll take this entire passage, and we'll do this. Because this is important. What can you do? Well, what this passage really says, right, is that if you want to make 10% back on your investments, if you put in £50,000 of your money, you will have to make £5,000 a year in terms of profit. Excuse me. Carbonated water. So essentially, if you want to make 10% off your money and you put in £50,000, every year you need to make £5,000. Makes perfect sense, right? But if you put in £10,000 and you take a loan of £40,000, you still have those 50,000. You have the exact same £50,000, and now if you want to make 10% profit, technically, all you would have to make is £1,000 a year to make back 10%, right? And so you can price yourself accordingly. If both of you definitely want to make 10%, right? Then essentially what that means is you can sell whatever you're selling, whatever widget that you're selling, you can sell that for 20% off the price of the guy that funded it himself. Yes, exactly. Let me write this up. Let's call this guy. No. Let's call this guy A, and let's call this guy B, right? A needs to, and we'll say need 10% return on money. Because sometimes you like if you don't have the 10% return on money, it doesn't, whatever. It doesn't matter. So we need 10% return on money, and so A needs to sell at 5,000 per year. And this is not really a math problem, right? Like B needs to sell at 1,000 a year. And oh right, and we should point out that this is pounds. There we go. And so obviously B has more room to lower prices. right? And what this is, what all of this is survival of the fittest. Right? That's literally all that capitalism is. And big capitalism. And yes, we do hear stories about bad capitalism and all of that, and that's why it is my belief that the state needs to have a role in everything. But again, like, that's survival of the fittest, evolution, right? How can we make progress? We can only make progress when there's competition, and this... Can I change color? Yes. And this is where competition comes from. Hello? Competition. Right? This is where competition comes from, and that's great. Absolutely, 100%. Well, I mean, I know you get it. I'm saying this to some of our classmates who might not understand what the whole purpose of capitalism, right? Right, and I do want to say this, and this is very let's call it just democratic structure, because it really is. It is a democratic structure of money, of wealth, right? Because it allows everyone who has or who wants, or it allows those who are brave enough to gain wealth, and those who are not brave enough, well, they will eat into their own wealth, and that'll eat into the family, and then the family will sort of collapse in on itself, right? I think that makes perfect sense. Prevents creation of great families, merchant princes, yeah, pushed out by dirty crowd of little men, they retire into idle luxury, blah 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 blah. And again, right, like, actually, let's add this in, because this is kind of important, right? Because this is capitalism and competition and survival of the fittest, right? That's it exactly. That by democratizing the ability for money to work, we are essentially we're saying, and this is not strictly always true, like, especially in our modern world where money can breed money so much easier than before, where... Okay, no, let me rephrase that. In the Industrial Revolution, you could only make money if you made a product, a physical product based on physical supply chains and all of that, that people would want, right? Whether that is newfangled powered loom, right? Or or something less wholesome, like heroin, not heroin. Oh, god damn it, what was it called? Poppies, the thing that comes from opium. Yeah, there we go. Yes, opium, right? Like, if you made something that people wanted to buy, then if you made a product that people wanted to buy, a physical product, that was the only way to get rich in the Victorian era. But now, people think that money can breed money, and that rich people get richer for having done nothing. And in part, that is not strictly wrong, in that there are great families that have a great amount of money, and they do exactly this, right? And they do exactly... Oh. No, not like that. Go away. They do exactly this, right? Because they have so much money, they put some of that money to work by funding other people with good ideas, and yeah, I mean, that is kind of... It sounds like it is the lazy way of doing things, and ideally, that is... We all should do an honest day's work for an honest day's returns, but I'm not here to defend rich people. No. But coming back to what we were saying before, that the easy availability of credit is what allows competition to flourish, right? Because if you're able to get money whenever you need, everybody with a good idea can turn that idea into a profitable business. If you have a good idea but you can't find the money, then you cannot create a profitable business, right? And so I don't want to get too far into it, but vs communism, right? Like it's I don't want to talk too much about it just now, but essentially money is, or no, let's not say money, let's say mathematics of money is a universal language. But no, there's no but. We'll get to it in the future. So I don't want to talk about communism today, and why that system is a system that breeds stagnation as opposed to competition. But we shouldn't. I shouldn't call it communism. I should call it socialism, because communism is much more a political thing than it is socialism. Right? Okay, good. Oh, right, we have a lot to go in this chapter still. What time is it? 47 minutes. Oof. Okay. We will think about how to do that, yes. But, I mean, honestly, like, this is a never-ending lecture anyway, so you guys should just sponsor for the next one as well. Yes. What do I say? The textbook was ever so sleepy as England. No other wants to see sleep. Yeah. So, what does this loan fund mean, right? These men do business at once and they produce it. They rely on cheapness. When we scrutinize the reason of the impaired reputation of English goods, you can see exactly what he's saying, right? Like, English goods are cheap and bad because the way that they're made is via actually no, I don't. Okay, double direction. Or actually no, let's just link in a single direction in this way. Delete from top to bottom. There we go. Oops, not like that. English goods are cheap because they are English goods are bad because they're made cheaply, because they are made using someone else's money and they have to be economical about things. Is that great? No. Right? Of course you want good things, but sometimes you don't want the perfect thing. You just want something that works well enough. Does that kind of make sense? Like, if you were given a choice between buying, let's say, I can't think of a good example. If you were thinking about of buying just a lot of like say for example 10 bottles of decent wine, or 1 bottle of Chateaubriand 1948, most of us would buy 10 bottles of very decent. Okay, I guess. Even that example was terrible, yes. No, because yeah, I just remember that we have at least what how many wine collectors do we have? Off the top of my head, I see like 6 of you. So yeah, okay. No, no. Um, but the point is there, right? Like why pay 100 times for something where paying just one time for? Or why pay so much more for something when something that's much cheaper also works basically just as well? And it yeah, exactly. And that's the one great excellence, right? That Badget is talking about, and that is because we are able to do this. No one has ever was ever so prompt at once to seize new advantages. And that is important because when you're seizing new advantages and when you have the money, when you have the ready access to capital, let's say ready access to capital. When you have that ready access to capital, yes, you might make things cheaply, but you will, I mean, ideally, once you get into it, you make things that work slightly better and better, and the technology itself progresses. And by progressing technology, only by progressing technology, when the state of the society is constantly looking towards the future, can you make life better for a greater amount of people, right? Like, you can think of it this way. In inferior articles of cheapness, right? Inferior articles. This is, what is this, right? Like in the Victorian era, what does this mean? This means bicycles. This means powered looms, right? This means trains, clothes for people, for regular people. Suddenly, if you can make clothes really cheaply, the regular people can take all of their hard-earned savings and they can use it to buy something else, or they can just deposit it into a bank, which would then fund, which would then like sort of encourage this virtuous cycle of there's more money in the banking system, so more money can be lent out, so more things can be improved upon, to then make everyone's lives easier, so that they can have more savings, right? And obviously this relationship has broken down somewhat in the modern era. We will talk about why that is. Well, I mean, I've talked about it at length in the past, and I've talked about it a little bit now, where we are selling services, and services really, really, really do not. Services are not a mass mobilizer of people. Services don't change. Like the quality of life that comes from increased services is not the same as increased or better consumer goods, right? What was I saying? Oh, right. Every challenge have great blah 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 blah. So this is again sort of our boy talking about. Excuse me. What happened here? What happened to my dots? My dots stopped running. Oh well, that's okay. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I will put that in where am I putting that in? I don't remember. But essentially, what I wanted to say is, this is static, right? This is static. Where can we put that? Don't I have something to put static? Not a blah 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 blah. Oh, I don't think we actually talk about it being static. I remember talking about it, but I don't remember where I talked about it. It's okay. Oh, I didn't make a square with it. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Let me just put this. I'll put this up there, and we'll talk about the laziness of human. We'll put this over here vis-a-vis socialism, because these things are kind of related. Laziness of humanity. There we go. This is quite complex, but this is what our modern society is founded upon. This is really like, this is what gives us the ability to have a conversation today, right? It is the banking system that has lent to the original creators of the personal computer, and the amount of money that existed in America and the West after World War II that was being put towards the development of the personal computer, and the amount of brave men and women, unfortunately mostly men, who went out and started companies to develop each of the parts that go into our computers. All of them depend on this floating loan fund. He calls it a floating loan fund. Don't worry about it. It's just essentially depends on this, the money market, right? Depends on being able to borrow money to start a business that they can then use to make money for themselves. And everyone with a great idea in our current society is able to do that ish. I mean, okay, yeah. So I work in venture capitalism. I mean, some of you know this. I have funded my own companies. I have founded my own companies and funded other companies. And this is essentially what all of this comes back to, right? Is if you have a great idea and you can convince someone to give you money for your great idea, then you can make that happen. Yes, I do. I've had a few. Yes. In fact, most of the people that I'm actually talking to on the Discord channel that I'm streaming to, most of them I've met in my time in business and in research and all of that. So like, yes. Let's move on, shall we? Constant chronic borrowing, and this is something else that I did want to talk about. Why do banks exist? Lombard Street acts as a great go-between. Where is it? Oops. Borrowable money, and we want to link that. Nah. There we go. I'm sure you like hearing me make noises. Yes. So let's talk about this. The purpose of a bank. In this case, the purpose is to connect people with money. I can't write. With money to people who need money. Right? And this sounds deceptively simple, right? It sounds deceptively simple because from an everyday person's life, how much money could we possibly need? Right? Like in to feed ourselves, to buy a house, all of that is change compared to the amount of capital that is necessary to do things like research a new microprocessor, for example. But back then in Bagehot's time, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, the most capital intensive thing was to build a railway, right? And nobody in the world had enough money in the sense that they could just like plonk down go to their bank account, take out sacks of money, and then just create a railway out of nowhere. Railways were the biggest most capital intensive things that existed in the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, and that was what banks really that showed the true beauty of the financial system, of the English financial system as it existed, because suddenly you take how do I say this? Actually, oops. Let me just do that. Let me just do that, and then we'll take that. Let me copy this reference, and then I'm gonna paste it here. Lombard Street is a great go-between, right? So Lombard Street, essentially, if this looks familiar, it's supposed to. It takes all of the money from rich people, middle class, poor people, and you can think of this as a bank, just any bank. Even today, this is really all our bank. What all our banks do, they sit at the arbitrage between people who have savings and people who want money. When you deposit your money in a bank, the bank definitely 100% loans it out to someone else most of the time. We can talk about the 2008 financial crisis, blah blah, bad access to credit and all of that. We'll talk about that. But essentially, the bank loans it out to people who want to buy a house, who maybe not like that, who, let's say, want to, we'll put that in red. Actually, no, we'll put that in blue. There we go. Buy a house, build a railway, build a microprocessing. Yes, I know you're just there to watch me not write this properly. Thank you. Processor. And interestingly enough, this is so just sort of on a side note here. Sony plus TSMC. Building a process plant in Japan. And this is partially funded by Sony, partially funded by TSMC, partially funded by the Japanese government. And the idea is, because this is risky, building a plant risky, you want enough backup so that when that thing fails, that you don't just die, right? And so that's why it's a whole bunch of reasons why that's important. But essentially, really, that's the whole point of the modern banking system, or the foundations of the modern banking system, of why we even have banks to begin with. It is that by having easy access to credit, we are able to create a virtuous cycle of life where things become better because we make them better, because there are people who can use that money better than how we use that money, right? And we will talk about, we will talk about when the system fails. Blah blah. Oops. We'll talk about when the system fails. Where? Organization of capital. Exact proportion to power of this system is its delicacy. And this is the whole point of actually this book that Walter Bagehot really wrote. It's talking about the delicacy of this issue. And we will get to this when we get to this. But the delicacy is actually one of the biggest issues of this of the banking system, and what happens when as I mean, I read this first chapter yesterday. So what happens when one of the banks fail? What happens to the depositors? What happens to the creditors? What happens to the people that depended on it? All of that is actually was developed by humanity within the last 150 years, and it all started right here on Lombard Street. Where is it? Right here on Lombard Street, right? And that's why this book is pretty important. But that's also why this topic is so difficult for a lot of people, because there are a lot of nuances, and our current society is not very good at dealing with nuances. Yes, anyway, but yes, you've guessed correctly. It's because I'm getting here because I want to wrap up for today. So, I don't know. This was fun for me, but I always have fun when I talk about these things. What do we feel? Do we have any questions? Excellent. Concerns? Excellent. That's not a concern. You know who you are that I'm talking to. Anyway, we're good. Anything else? No? Okay. Okay, well. That's besides the point, and that's something we can talk about offline, yes. If there's nothing else, well then, thank you very much for watching today. I had a lot of fun. From the discussions that were generated, I can see that you guys are having a lot of fun as well, even though nobody wants to admit it. That's fine. In conclusion, then, thank you again very much for watching. Please download Firefox. Please don't do Chrome. And interestingly enough, actually, Chrome is considered a monopoly, and we'll talk about monopolies when we get to it. But there are reasons why railways and robber barons and all of these things exist as terms from that particular age, because there were no safety measures in place to make sure that these people did their work on a level playing field, right? So yeah, don't do Chrome, download Firefox. And once again, I've wasted how long? An hour and 7 minutes of your time today. Thank you. Bye bye.